Okay, everybody, welcome back to your crisis coach with calm and relaxed Fred Carroll and Scott H. Silverman. How are you, Mr. Scott?
I'm well, Fred. I'm doing well. You know, we're here in Southern California. We weren't going to mention this, but there's a lot of weird stuff going on. I'll just say that. And a lot of people are frightened, and it's scary, and it shouldn't be happening, but it is. And so we're going to do everything we can to breathe and move through it. You know, it's out of my control.
Yeah, I think it'll clear itself up one way or the other, unfortunately, but let's hope on the better side of things. I've been dealing with a maniac customer all day at work who drove me up a tree, and now I'm calm and mellow. You know,
How do you, how do you know?
she really burned me out. She really burned me out.
Well, how do you know
And
you're calm and mellow now, though? I can't really tell.
I don't drink. I don't smoke. So it's not anything added. I just choose this path. I don't get paid to be home. And my phone keeps ringing from work from this woman. And it's frustrating that I can't do anything. I don't have my computers here for work, and she's expecting the world. And this is what I deal with every day when you're dealing with, unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, I deal with wealth, a lot of wealth. These are very wealthy people that expect me to perform. So,
well, there you go.
Her expectations will not be met.
Great. And if it gets bad, just send her to me.
Yeah. Well, she's more than anything. Honestly, this show does help me through moments like this because obviously being with you and stuff, I have learned to be a more compassionate listener more than anything, something I wasn't ever. But she challenges me mentally because this woman breaks down. We're talking for people out there that don't know what I do. I'm in the window and door industry. She spent a lot of money on windows. She is not happy with these windows, and my job is to make her happy. And I'm not succeeding, but they're windows. This isn't a reason to cry. She's crying, physically crying in front of me and just breaking down. And I don't deal well with that yet.
Well,
I'm not good
my
at
experience is, you know, you may be the only one who's listening to her, so you get to get the sharing, whether you want it or not, because you're willing to listen.
Well, so you brought a friend with you today, I see.
Yeah, Elena Wayne, I didn't even know her last name, is somebody I see all the time, and I don't think we've actually physically met in person yet. But you know, Fred and I have been doing this almost 6 years now, Fred, and we've never physically met in person yet because he's across the country. So you know, and you know my personality enough, Elena, to know that it's probably best I don't physically meet a lot of people for their own personal safety and my own preservation. So anyway, but Elena's a lady who I've heard talk, and I'll let her share her story. And she always is resilient with her sharing and compassionate with her caring and her listening. And, you know, about a year and a half ago, she said, you know, I haven't been on your podcast yet. And I said, well, it's time we get it going. So here we are about 18 months later, just to show how busy we are, not how picky we are, but how busy we've been. So with that, I want to welcome you, Elena, and let you just share with the audience a little bit about your story and whatever you want to say about me. Hopefully our audience has already heard, but I dare you to say something different. We'll see what happens. So the floor is all yours, young lady. So tell us about Elena and what's going on in your world and where you live and about your family and stuff that nobody knows until you tell them.
All right. Thank you, Scott, for having me. It's great to meet you, Fred. I actually ended up in Imperial Valley, which is in the southeast corner of California. It's 108 degrees today. It's usually 120 about by August. I was not born and raised here. I was actually born and raised in Montana. and followed a man down here, don't you know, because that's what we do, and got clean and sober here when I was 22 years old. I actually fell into AA by accident. I was actually seeking out Al-Anon because I kept picking crazy boyfriends, and I figured that was what my problem was. So I'm actually just celebrated 36 years in Al-Anon this year, and I will be celebrating 35 years of sobriety next month. So that's kind of the beginning. I wasn't planning on spending the last 30 some years in the desert, but this is where I found sobriety, and I found my tribes, and I found mentors. I met my husband here in the rooms, and we were married for 31 years. He had 8 years of sobriety when I met him. We got married, and I was 6 months sober at the time. And I had a relapse 6 months into the marriage because I had thought I married recovery. I wasn't going to need to do what everybody else needed to do. So I just kind of went to meetings for a year, learned how to talk the talk, and had a relapse. But I didn't think it should count because it was on pot, don't you know? It wasn't on booze. And I swore I was going to be able to keep that a secret. And of course, when I went to show up to take my 1 year AA cake, of course, it just popped right out of my head that, I relapsed, and dang it. So I became willing to get a sponsor at that time and actually do some of the suggestions. And my life has been changing ever since. But I'm going to tell you, my story is a little different than other people because I'm a true believer that 90% of my recovery program is Al-Anon, and I drank over all of my Al-Anon issues. And one of the things I've done as a sponsor for the last 20 years is I sponsor in both Al-Anon and AA. And every woman who is sponsored by me in AA is required to go to at least 6 Al-Anon meetings. And usually they're kicking and screaming for the first 3. But by number 6, they're like, oh, I get it. So what else?
Share a little bit about, because there are going to be people that don't even understand what a sponsor is, or maybe what Al-Anon is, or even AA, as a recovery, as a fellowship. So share a little bit about what you've learned on your journey, about what that means to you. So for people, because I believe this is a family disease. And what I mean by that is, if I'm the person who suffers from the maladaptive behavior, if you will, the addiction, compulsive obsessive behavior, and I'm married to my wife who is not an individual suffering from self-medication and the kind of things that I did in my past, we found ways to work together. But because it's a family disease, if one doesn't get treated, that disease continues to grow. So share a little bit about Al-Anon and sponsorship, because those are terms, that, you and I may hear all the time, but some people are like, wait, what? I thought it was just, right. I thought, please.
So I'll tell you a little bit of my childhood background because that's where a lot of my qualifications came from. I never met my biological dad. He wrote my mom a Dear Jane letter before I was born, and they were never married. So my first 5 years was fabulous, had my mom all to myself. And then she married my stepdad, who was a 6'2" Native American, raging, violent alcoholic. And so for the next 6 years, myself, my younger sister, and my brother were pretty much subject to a lot of violence, sexual abuse. But we were the kind of family towards the end. My mom was constantly packing us up and racing to one of her friends' house for rescue and everything, but she would always go back until he almost killed her one night. And she decided, okay, maybe I need to finally leave the marriage. And she had started Al-Anon actually 2 or 3 years before that. And I remember hating that little blue book from Al-Anon because all of a sudden things escalated when that book entered our household. So by the time she divorced him, I was about 11. And I'll be quick, but we, in Montana, incest was not something you talk about in the early 70s. So My mom decided to prosecute charges. I went in front of a courtroom, told things that had happened to me from 5 to 11, and he got off. So then my mom decided, oh, I'm going to send her to Germany to go be with my relatives because my mom's straight over the thing from Germany, has a strong accent to this day. And my 16-year-old cousin took me to a bar, and I had my very first drink and my very first Marlboro cigarette. And I found a solution to intense pain that I didn't put down for 10 years after that. I spent time in group homes. I spent time in foster homes. I had been in and out of jail a few times. I had some adopted grandparents that became my guardians when I was 16, so they got me through high school. By the time I was 21, followed this latest guy here. My mom gave me a really evil book called Women Who Love Too Much. And it's a really old book, but there's nothing worse than seeing that crap. I have a pattern. I keep picking the same type of guy over and over and over again, not realizing I had my own disease at the time. So because I qualified, not just picking partners that were addict alcoholics, but growing up in alcoholism, I decided to go to my very first Al-Anon meeting. And Al-Anon is for family and friends of alcoholics and addicts. And I loved it because it was the first place I could talk about the secrets. Because growing up in an alcoholic household, you're not allowed to talk about the secrets. You're not allowed to have any emotions. You're not allowed to talk back. You just can't be seen or heard. You learn not to be seen or heard. And for that first year I was there, I think I had some really wise women there, because when I first walked in, they were happy and laughing. And I was like, ooh, this is kind of weird. And then they were like, yeah, we're married to active alcoholics. And I was like, what drugs are you all on? Because if you're married to the kind of guy I grew up with, you should not be happy and laughing. What's wrong with this picture? But I kept coming back anyway. And they were really passionate. And they were like, hey, honey, one of the things we recommend in Al-Anon is go visit some AA meetings. And I was like, why should I go to AA? And they were like, well, we think you should just learn more about alcoholism. It will help you with your Al-Anon program. And I think they were just very sly, because, of course, the first time I ever went to an AA meeting after a few months in Al-Anon, it was like, oh, crap, I think I have this thing. Because I heard my story. So I was lucky, though, I came into Al-Anon before I came into AA, because I have always worked them side by side. I had an awesome sponsor that had me work both sets of steps those first 8 years. And when I say sponsor, she was someone that helped me work the 12 steps of Al-Anon and AA. And she also was the person that, I think sometimes you have people put in your life that give you what you never got growing up. And she was like the best mom I never had. And so when I would call her and say, he's doing this and he's doing that, because, taking my ex's inventory was like a full-time job. And she would listen very calmly. She'd be like, okay, what's your part? And it was like, did you not just hear what I said? It's all about him. And she was like, yeah, I heard what you said, but let's talk about your part. So those were the kind of women that got brought into my life that basically taught me skills, taught me how to communicate, taught me how to pause. But you guys are just lucky to meeting this version, because all the versions prior to this year, hot mess. Not that I don't have hot messes now, I do. But I was a whirling trauma dish of psycho bitch, victim, drama queen. That was pretty much how I rolled for the first probably 10 years in both programs.
So, Elena, thank you for sharing that. Tell us, where'd you go to school? What did you study? What did you want to be when you grew up? Because you obviously, with all that stuff going on, it probably made setting goals complicated, because you weren't sure, what hammer was going to come down next or what was going to walk through the front door. But tell us a little more about, because clearly this is a big part of your life, but it's not your whole life. So as we want to get to know you, and I want to get to know you. I mean, I've been listening to you for years, and I want to know more about you. So tell us a little bit about that part of your journey in your life.
So school was really important to me. I became a teacher's pet in every single grade I was, because I got everything I needed in school. I got the pats on the back. I was a straight A student until junior high, when I picked up my first drink or drug. I loved school. I was a reader. I got all the reading awards for how many books can you possibly read. Um, I hated sports. I'm tall. I'm 5'10". So everybody wanted me to play basketball. It was like, no, but I would play tetherball. I would play, kickball, all the things that we did in, the 70s and 80s. I love that kind of stuff. I always, what's interesting is some of the most important people that kept me from going over the edge were the counselors in school. When I was living in a group home, I had a junior high counselor that kept me from going over the edge, that saw how wounded I was and really stepped in and encouraged me. And when I was in high school and I was circling the drain, I had a really fabulous high school counselor that somehow noticed me and kept me from circling the drain. And I graduated because of that man. And, I had some really good counselors in the stupid flipping group home, even though I know they were like college students and probably didn't know it. We were all hot messes in the group homes. We were all traumatized. We were all into drugs and alcohol. And the fact that, we would have a counselor stay for 9 months was incredible. But I always loved business. I always loved numbers. I worked in a bank for 20 years in the corporate world. I was a VP in benefits and payroll. We got bought out. I got laid off after 20 years, which I had to do a whole nother inventory because I didn't realize I had stepped into workaholism. I was working 60 hours a week because, there's payoffs, kind of like school, right? Teacher's pet. I learned how to get payoffs. And when you work a whole bunch, even though you didn't get paid overtime, I got recognition. I got to pretend to be a grown-up in a suit. I got to travel. But there's consequences that happen from workaholism. So after a year of being laid off, I went back to school, got my bachelor's degree, drove back and forth to Cal State San Bernardino for 3 years, got my master's degree, and I started teaching at our little community college. I loved accounting, and I found out I loved teaching. And then they needed a payroll person, and I was like, I do love payroll. I do like to do payroll, and I would like to be able to pay my mortgage in case my husband passed away. So I've been doing that for like about 10 years now, and I love working for my community college.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear. So you medicated yourself based off being sexually assaulted as a child and stuff like that. But I always like hearing these stories because it reveals my life, which similar pattern. At 8 years old, I was sexually molested, but I never medicated. But I do. That's what interests me is how different people. I guess it's when it's introduced, just like you said, you had your first beer and drink, and that was when you realized you could mask it there. And I guess I'm lucky I wasn't introduced to that. Not that I was some, guy, but I turned mine more into not only sexuality at a young age, where I treated it like a weapon, more like notches, not love involved, more just the deed and then done type stuff. It was notches on a bedpost. But I also can understand being a workaholic. That's something I've always done. And I always tell myself, maybe I'm just realizing now, maybe it is because of that at 8 years old. I always thought it was because I was trying to make enough money to get out of my situation. But maybe I was just trying to solve my situation. I don't know, but it is interesting
I
to
can
hear
turn
someone
anything
say
into
that.
an ism. I can't. I mean, and I smoked for
Yeah.
the first 8 years of my sobriety. And as the second I put the cigarettes down, I decided time to have a baby. And you know what that meant? Went way over, almost killed my husband at the time trying to have a baby. And then we had her, and he changed, and I picked up food and went into OA for a few years. And that was a trippy program. So, yeah, I can turn anything into an ism except exercise and eating vegetables. Can't do that.
It's interesting because it almost has a psychological feel. It because you had already mentioned that you enjoyed school because that's where people told you you're doing a good job. It's almost, and this is just purely right now in the moment thinking, it's as if you pick up these habits because you know you're going to get that attention on the back end when you solve this habit.
Well,
Am I correct in any
I don't
way?
even think it's really habits, to be honest. It's just an ism. I'm just trying to shove something else into the hole. I mean, honestly, and Scott, who's been listening to me for the last few years, and this is really sad to say, after being in recovery for 35 years, it wasn't until 3 years ago I intentionally started giving myself everything I expected everybody and everything to give me, whether it was attention, whether it was love, whether it, I didn't realize I had abandoned myself all this time. I didn't realize that all the things I was accusing everybody else of doing to me, I did to myself too. And that was really a wake up call because after getting divorced after 31 years, I dated, and I thought I could live with the whole roster thing. And I had friends, we were doing rosters and all these different things, right? Because I thought, I'm free. I can do all these different things I haven't done for 31 years. And realizing I was just trying to fill the hole again, and in a different way, in a way I hadn't for 31 years. And that's when all of a sudden, I went back to therapy, and I started really seeing all the stuff I wanted from outside, job recognition or awards or whatever it was, that was never going to fill the flipping hole. I could make millions of dollars, and that was not going to fix me. I could get all the fame and fortune, and that was not going to fix me. It was never going to be enough. And when I intentionally started giving myself high fives and actually doing loving things for myself and making those changes, holy crap, my life changed dramatically. And I didn't need anything else.
Where's your you had a daughter, is that correct?
I do. I have a daughter. She just turned 28 years old. She lives in San Diego, has a few jobs so she can afford to live in San Diego, living her best life, and has a boyfriend over there.
And how's your relationship with her now?
Well, I can't give you details about her life because I'd have to ask permission first, but I can tell you something very significant happened in her junior high / high school years while I was driving back and forth to school. And it was extremely traumatizing. And I thought I would be prepared because of Al-Anon for anything that was going to be thrown my way. And she got a diagnosis, and my husband had the same diagnosis, but his presented differently than hers. And my sponsor, quote unquote, mentor at the time, I went to her and I said, hey, I need help with this. And she's like, I can't help you because I have no experience in that. And I was like, what? And I realized I needed a different tribe to help me with this. And it was, let's just say that for 3 years, I lived on Dramamine. I was so nauseous because I didn't know every day if my daughter was going to wake up alive or not. And I think that's one of the reasons why when people first hear about the word Al-Anon in 12-step recovery, they're not willing to look at it until those of us in recovery have an adult kid who picks up because I think sometimes we get a little comfy and we think, oh, because they see me in recovery and they hear about me going to all these different things, they're never going to la la la. There's no guarantee. And that's the whole thing. So a lot of us that have adult kids that, whether it's mental, whether it's drug, whatever it is, will find self in the rooms of Al-Anon because that's what it's there for. And we are affected by other people's. And there's nothing harder in all my years of Al-Anon is the parents who are watching their kids slowly die and feeling so powerless. And it's tougher than watching the spouses die. And I can say that honestly after, meeting thousands of people in the rooms of Al-Anon, and it's tough. I've had to go to a few funerals, and it's really tough when they bury their kid.
Yeah. So tell me, it's interesting because when it comes to the fellowship or recovery, there's still a huge stigma around it. But in the last 12, 15 years, coaching and mentoring and helping someone else and joining support groups and becoming part of this group, and it's just interesting. The last couple of weeks, I've been getting multiple emails from this Christian men's group, and I'm hesitant. And, they see my profile on LinkedIn. They think, oh, you'll be an important part. And I'm wondering, did these people look at my last name? Do they really want me to be? So I'm thinking about, I might go to the meeting next week because I like the idea of, experiencing other faiths. But, they keep talking about, a Christian-based men's, spiritual leadership. And it's kind of a business-driven, it seems like. But, all kinds of, and I've been part of Rotary, and I was part of, following up in Sunday school. So I've belonged to groups for a long time, and nonprofits work I've done for decades and still continue to do that. So for you, do you find that as well? By the way, before you answer that, I didn't realize that we had something specifically in common, and food and exercise and vegetables. It's funny because I am and have been able to become compulsive and obsessive about almost everything in my life except exercise. And vegetables I don't think about as much because I figure if I started exercising, I'd probably want to eat more vegetables. So I decide not to start. That way I don't have to worry about the vegetables. It's like I have a higher power and I have a God. That way I can kind of, tell myself what I want to tell myself and do what I want to do. But that's why I go to meetings is I like to share that my brain is like a bad neighborhood. I never go in there alone. And, that's just part of my brain, the way it's wired. And if we were talking about diabetes, nobody would judge us. If we were talking about heart conditions or cancer, or even an overbite or difficulty, breathing through our nose, everyone would accept that. So that stigma around the disease of addiction and people who self-medicate still it's much better than it's been, but it's got a long way to go. So more people can actually, look at the suicide rate we have in this country. And when you add up the overdoses and people who die from alcoholism on a daily basis, it's north of 1,000 people. That's still a lot of people every single day. And more than likely 80% of them, if they got and sought help, they wouldn't be a morbidity statistic. So I'm a firm believer, and maybe it's blind faith, but I believe that, there's always hope and help. So speaking of hope and help, what would you tell people that were thinking about asking for help, the three magic words I like to say that are hardest in English language? What would you advise them based on your years of experience and your history? What would you tell people if you're not sure what to do? Maybe try this, or head this way, or pick up the phone, or go on the, what would your suggestions be?
So depending upon which program they're in. So the first thing I tell newcomers when they come into an AA meeting, go ahead.
I don't want to, let's assume they're not in a program. Let's assume that their life is a hot mess.
Okay.
And they don't know why. And, they're having because, look, this disease is a disease of denial. So most people don't say, what's my part in this? They're just saying, oh, he's crazy or she's crazy, and I can't seem to get what I want out of life. So they take the other turn and, they put their chin in their chest and their eyeballs and their shoelaces. And the sky is always following. So let's assume they don't know. Let's assume they're not participating in some sort of either a spiritual connection or religious or faith-based or any kind of real group of any kind. They're on their own, even though they may be around a lot of people. What would you tell someone like that?
So the first thing I do is I hone in on exactly, I have a little radar, and I think most of us do after we listen to certain tones, we start to listen experiences and reactions. And I call it pulling out my mess into the message. So I will, because I can tell you right now, most of the women I've met in either rooms have had the same background that Fred and I have had. No one gets out alive or unscathed, but I will somehow figure out a way to identify that, and I will I will share my stuff. I have no problem sharing my stuff. And even if I suspect, I will put little things out there, but I try not to traumatize anybody. So I try to pay attention to clues. And so if I think that there's addiction or alcoholism or sexual abuse involved, I will share a very tiny little snippet of my stuff and see what the reaction is. And I will talk about it from a place of love and compassion and safety, because I have learned that I did not always share safely. I actually traumatized people with some of my sharing in the early years because I didn't know. And so I will also invite them to come with me places. I will say, hey, I'm going to go try out this Al-Anon Zoom meeting. You want to meet online and check it out, see if it's something you want to listen to. Or I will say, hey, I was just listening to this podcast, or I was just listening to this speaker, you want to come listen to it? Hey, I was just reading this book. You want to come do a book club? I do all sorts of different things. I will go have coffee. I will go do different things. But I also realize that when people are ready, I try to give them enough information about myself and try to be as authentic as possible so that if they're interested, maybe they aren't that moment, but I try to leave just enough to say, if you want to know more, just let me know. If you want me to meet you somewhere, I will meet you there. Because the thing is, and especially when it comes to family members, I think sometimes there's this thing that goes off that says, that's their problem. That's not my problem. And so I will specifically go into detail how I was affected by somebody else's drinking or drugs, how I was affected growing up by it, how I was affected, and how I realized by being with other people. And I would talk about keeping the secrets. I would talk about, how I would recreate my childhood by the partners I was picking. I would share about those things that people are afraid to share about. Because one thing is, as Scott knows, I have a voice and I'm not afraid to use it. And if it's, I'm willing to share about anything about my life if I think it will help one other person. I have nothing to hide today. But I have to jump back to this, Scott, because somehow you knew. I have a little bit of experience with the whole church and state thing. So I started going to church at the same time I got clean and sober. When I got married at 6 months of sobriety, my husband and I at the time, we're going to do this bridge between church and AA, and we're going to do this Overcomers. It's a 12-step based church thing, right? And we had grand plans. We were going to be the bridge. We were going to connect the Christians and the recovery thing. And it kind of blew up after 12 months. And I realized that was part of my relapse too, because one of the things that my pastor at the time said, you don't need AA. You just need to be saved. You just need to go to Bible studies. You just need to do that. And I relapsed. And I felt so much shame. And this is just my experience. I am not saying that there are not fabulous churches out there. There are some great recovery churches that people have told me about, and that is fabulous for them. But for me, I eventually had to leave the church because it was no longer in alignment with the principles and the integrity of my program. And there wasn't an understanding in this particular church about recovery and the disease. But I tried to fit for a really long time. And I know that some people have left AA and found recovery in churches, and that is fabulous for them. But that is not my story. So, but I've been a resource for my churchy people for years, whether it's been Al-Anon or AA. They're like, oh, you got a member of your family that has an ism? Call Elena. And I am the girl, come talk to me. And I've been great, but for me, my spirituality outgrew the churches. And so, and that's okay. And that's okay. And I will always be a resource. My churchy friends always know that I'm a resource. But I tried to go to an Overcomers Anonymous meeting with a sponsee last year. And I think sometimes when people are in recovery and we know who we are and we know what our faith is and everything, and we're coming into churches, because just like AA, we're the wounded. We're not well. We're not in churches or any kind of 12-step group because we're well. But I think I could tell that I pushed so many buttons just by being who I was that they couldn't get rid of me fast enough. And that was okay. And I've learned that there are some rooms I don't belong. And if I can't help somebody in those rooms, I am totally okay not going to those rooms. Because there's a lot of them I belong in. I don't know. But for me, I stay away from anything that is...
What's interesting...
churchy. I tried to play cards with one of my church ladies the other month, and I heard so much of the T word. And they were like, oh, it's okay. We're all Republicans here. And I'm like, nope, I'm not. I'm a full-blown feminist now. And they were just like clutching their pearls. So I realized I probably won't be invited back to play cards anymore.
What's interesting, Elena, watching you speak, I notice you're very, you speak with, some people speak just to be, for the sake of speaking, especially when on a show and stuff, but you're careful enough to take the pauses to make sure you say the right thing that you want to. It's like speaking with intention, and it's nice to see that you take your time and you make sure you get the point across, because you're very much like Scott, I would assume, where sure, it'd be nice to save 100 people, but you're content saving one. And so is Scott. And that's what I was going to call out about his message about this church-based thing. One thing he's always preached, Scott, was he doesn't care how you get sober. He cares that you do get sober. So he doesn't, if you need to become a mountain climber and that's what's keeping you from become a mountain climber. So I say, give these guys a chance and go in with a better faith rather than the faith of thinking it's the negative. Go in with the positive, and you could always walk away just like she did. So at least you explored and you got another version of something. And I'm quite sure, Scott, you'll learn something from them that you didn't know, for good or bad, to use in your future. And that's my discipline.
Al-Anon has a famous phrase, take what you like and leave the rest.
That's disciplinary.
I am a huge believer in that. And I'm also a huge believer in the set-aside prayer. I set aside everything I think I know. Because God, I tell myself so many stories about people that before I even hear the words leave their mouth. And I realize I have to totally delete the story. I don't know this person's story. I don't know where they're from. I don't know where they're coming from. I don't know anything. Because I make so many assumptions.
Yeah. Okay, Scott. So wrapping this up, do you want to ask your magic question before my magic question?
My magic question is pretty straightforward. I think is there something that we haven't asked you that you would like us to ask you?
I want you to ask me what I want to be when I grow up.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
You're asking a person that thinks.
I want to be a life coach / experience. What is my friends call me the experiential therapist. And I want to learn how to do that, because last year when I thought I wanted to become a life coach, I ended up in DA, which is Debtors Anonymous, in case you've never heard of that. And I found out that I have a fear of success and under-earner. And I had a really hard time figuring out, I've been doing this for free for 20 some years, and how dare I charge money to do this? And I know I tried to talk to Scott about it last year and I wasn't ready. So this year, I am trying to be more intentional. I've had to do lots of inventories and different things since that time. So that's what I want to be when I grow up. Is I want to.
We have talked about this, you and I.
Mhm.
So you have to get on the phone and you have to call me and we'll talk about it, because it's the whole lived experience concept has really evolved. You can always tell when the federal government or the state government or the county is issuing grants to support groups that help other people. And one of the things they're shouting out now out loud is, we really want people with lived experience. And the reason is traditional modalities of therapeutic support. Well, let me back up. One size doesn't fit all. So it can be off-putting for people to even enroll but when people hear that someone's got experience and they're approaching what they're trying to do to help others comes from lived experience, I think it's kind of an easier, softer way for people to learn. That's my opinion. And I can't tell you how many arguments I've gotten in with therapists and psychiatrists, and some of the smartest people I know tell me that my experience is more helpful in many cases than people who follow, let's call it the DSM-5 for the federal government on how to deliver therapeutical modalities to help people. And that's critically needed at some point. But the book or the design that was made years ago, what I like this phrase, what got you here may not get you there. So don't let go of that dream and talk with me about it. We'll see if we can figure out a way to figure out a way. God knows we need help.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Elena, that you say things that our lives seem to have a similarity beyond I didn't have the addictions that were added in. I'm sure I've had some, but nothing what I would consider life altering. But you'd mentioned the fear of success, and it's something I talk about in one of my books. It's something I live with every day, and I can't pin it down. It's almost like even going back to being molested as a child, it took me nearly 40 years to even talk about it. I'm 55 now. I didn't talk about this till I was well into my just over 50. It's only been like 3 years. Now I feel free to talk about it to anybody. But I don't know if why I didn't feel like I was good enough to be an author, good enough to do podcasting, good enough to make videos, good enough to work this job. I'm my own worst critic in life in general, even with work. You saw how I started this show. My whole life right now is my mind is filled with how am I going to do my job to make this woman's problem go away, and I'm not even being paid to do that right now.
Right.
But that's
Sounds
all
like
that's on
sounds
my
like
mind.
an ism, doesn't it?
Is how am I going to solve her problem?
Right.
Yes. Yeah, it's mentalism. It's an ism. Okay, so that's going to be it. I want to thank Elena for joining us. I want to thank Scott for always joining us, because he's semi-retired and he gets to sit home and never leaves the house, and he's in sunny, poor Scott's in sunny California. Boo-hoo, poor Scott, while I'm out here in Connecticut. It's 61 degrees today.
106.
And I don't know where she's living. To me, she's in hell. This is hell to me. 106. You got to be insane. You couldn't get me
dude,
there.
We have fabulous food over here.
And I bet you they don't even have good pizza or anything. I don't know. I'm a pizza snob, but I am from Connecticut. It's a little different here. We were recently named pizza capital of the world, the state of Connecticut. You know that, Scott. And that has nothing to do with me, except I eat pizza. But that's it, Scott. The show's over. This is your crisis coach with Scott H. Silverman. I'm Fred Carroll. And if no one has told you they love you today, we love you. I'm sure Elena loves you. Elena could. Oh, we should ask Elena. Is there any way for people to
I
get a
am on
hold of you or to
TikTok. I'm
contact
the
you? Do you have
Irish Maid
social media?
67.
Anything you
I'm
want
on
to share?
Instagram. I'm on Facebook. And Scott's going to get me to do YouTube eventually.
Well, share those links, share those connections with Scott or me in via email so I could add them into the thing, and maybe you'll gain a few friends or a few
Oh,
people
yeah.
that
Happily
need
single for the
to.
rest of my life.
Maybe we could add to your nightmare boyfriend scenario. I don't know. Yeah, I said that once. I said that once. You know, it turns out marriage, if you're not good at something, why do it? I'm just no good at marriage. I figured that out. So I've done it once. It's enough. Okay, everybody. We'll see you again soon. Hang out there, Elena.